Good morning and welcome to today's webinar series on qualitative and mixed methods with MAXQDA, our latest 6-week series. And now we're going to actually jump in. We've talked about building a coding system. Now we're going to actually talk about how we use it and how we code data. And we're going to draw on all of those things we've talked about in the past, the importance of memos and comments and paraphrases. My name is Michael Gizzi. I am a professor of criminal justice. I have a PhD in political science. I teach at Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois, about 2.5 hours south of Chicago, where at this point it is a little after 10 a.m. in the morning. I'm a professional trainer, consultant for MAXQDA. I've been using MAXQDA for about 6 years now, or whenever it was that the Mac version of MAXQDA came out. Co-editor with Dr. Stefan Rodecker, the newly released book, The Practice of Qualitative Data Analysis, Research Examples Using MAXQDA. For next week's webinar, I would highly encourage you to actually read my chapter in that book, chapter 4, because it will make next week's webinar make a lot more sense. The book is published by MAXQDA Press, and it's available for free as a PDF from maxqda-press.com. Basically, all you got to do at this point is go to the MAXQDA website, and they've got like a pop-up thing on the screen. They're advertising the heck out of the book, which is great. Completely free for the PDF. It is available in a print format from Amazon, and it's, I know what it is. It's $19.99 US dollars on the American side, the equivalent in euro. And they're printing these. I think they're doing these on demand, and I've ordered a few, and they come fairly quickly. The only difference between the two, between the free book and the print book, is the PDF is in color and the print book is in grayscale for the images. So check that out. We're very excited about that book. There are other things at MAXQDA Press which you certainly should look for. There's a variety of guides. They're in multiple languages now, and everything at MAXQDA Press is free. If you're brand new to the software and you don't have MAXQDA on your computer, one, you don't need it today, but two, you're going to want to grab yourself a trial of it from maxqda.com/trial. It's a 30-day free trial of the full package. And finally, if you are not a member of the research network, this is a really good thing to join. maxqda.com/research-network, equally free. Basically, one email a month provides you access to a lot of resources for training, teaching materials, and just access to help. So definitely join. All right, the commercials are over. So today we're going to talk about coding data. I will kind of refresh a little bit from last week for a few things. And what I'll do is I'll spend about 10 minutes with the presentation. I think I've got like 10 slides. And then we're going to spend the rest of our time live exploring doing this ourselves. But the plan for today is we're going to talk about, the process itself, not of creating codes, although that will be a part of it. It won't be the primary purpose, but how you actually code your data, the tools that are available to you for doing that within the document browser and within the right-click menu. We'll talk a little bit about in vivo coding, highlighting or color coding. We will look at the smart coding tool, which has a lot of uses, especially if you have interview data with questions that all have the same, the question responses are coded by that question. We will also jump back briefly to our session on paraphrasing, and we'll talk about categorizing paraphrase segments as one of the tools. We'll explore a little bit about auto coding. We'll show you how you can use searches and then word lexical searches, and then use that to have MAXQDA code words for you. We'll explore a little bit with Twitter. And throughout the process, we'll talk about writing while you code, the use of in-selection memos, code comments, and as time permits, we'll also refresh about organizing new codes that you create. So, little refresher. Last week we talked about the code menu, one of the main ribbon menus in MAXQDA. The code menu you use if you want to, it's one of the ways to create a new code. You can use it for organizing codes with creative coding. You can use the smart coding tool, which I'll explore later. You can look at subcode statistics for parent and child codes. And it gives you other tools for shortcuts, favorites, and importing and exporting your code system. So the code menu kind of provides some high-level access to tools. For me, I don't tend to use it to create new codes. I generally use it if I'm interested in getting to the creative coding or the smart coding tool. But then you have the code system itself on the bottom left of your screen usually, and that has a variety of icons. Has a variety of icons on the right, an icon, and so what I've done here is I've recreated these so you can see what they each mean. The reset activations turns off any activated codes. Display codes from activated documents only. Create a new code, exact same tool that's in the code menu. A search tool to search codes. A preferences dialog to access a variety of ways you can tweak how you use the code system. We will actually explore that a little bit when we're live later. And the ability to undock the window, the coding system window, so it's a separate window in MAXQDA, or to maximize it to take the full screen, or to close the code browser itself. So those icons we've talked about last week. We will kind of use several of them today. The document browser. We talked a little bit about this last week. The document browser here, what you see is if we're actually in a document, and this is a case for my dog sniff study, and what we're going to be interested in here are each of these icons that exist. So this morning I created you yet another neat little graphic. What do these things mean? So there are several icons here that are tied to coding, and this is a coding symbol in MAXQDA. So the first one is to code the highlighted segment, and what it will do is if you click on that, whatever code you most recently added or used, it will add that to an existing segment of a document. The next icon is to code with a new code, and that's where you have the plus. Code in vivo, which is where the code that you create, it'll be a new code created with the exact words, words used in that you've highlighted. And the difference with the icon is there's a little eye there. Open coding mode, it will automatically pop up a new code window whenever you highlight something. I'll show you that as well. Highlighting coding, or coding by color. This is basically just another type of what we call emoticode. The colors mean whatever you want them to mean. You cannot change the colors for them, but you can rename the codes, and we'll show that as well. I'll show that actually in an example from Danielle's project. The display emoticode window allows you to do all of your coding without words and use symbols like emoticodes. I don't use this myself. A few years ago, MAXQDA, a few releases ago, MAXQDA had created a tablet version for MAXQDA so that you could take documents that you had on an iPad or a tablet and you could code them on your tablet, but only using emoticodes. Emoticodes can also be renamed so you can ultimately use these images for pretty much any code you want. Recently used codes is on the far left of the menu, and it looks sort of like this, and it's a drop down of the most recent codes that you've used. Thought it was limited to 5, but it doesn't seem to be. And then the last one is the undo code, and all that will do is undo the last code you created or you applied. So the document browser provides you with all of these tools here. One of the things that's important here, though, is most of these will be grayed out unless you have actually highlighted some segment in your document. Okay, and again, I'll show you that live as well. The next component that we'll want to be exploring is the right-click menu. So once you've highlighted a selection, you've made a selection, if you right-click with your mouse or trackpad, it will give you in-document coding shortcuts, and that will allow you to either create a new code, code in Vivo, or code with, as this says, with ... formal training. That was the last code I had used, and so, or the code that was selected. With activated codes, I'll have to explore that one in a bit, because when I was doing that one, I didn't activate anything. So, so the right-click menu is also useful. Notice new code here. New code here. New code here. New code here. They're all the same. They're just multiple shortcuts to get to the same thing. Oh, and we just talked about it, but the emoticode window, when you click on that icon, this is what pops up. So here are all the emoticodes that are in MAXQDA. It looks just sort of like emojis on your phone, and you can code with these images, and then you can rename the images. So there's a whole slew of them, and it even has a most commonly used example. I can think of ways in which this could be useful if you want to highlight particular codes, and I'll show. We'll explore that as well. And we've talked about the idea of creating new codes, but it's important to realize that when you click on that, this is what you're going to get. that new code window to build your entire system. Your code names can be 63 characters long. You can select a color for the code if you want. You can, if it is a subcode, you can have it use the color of the code that's its parent or above it. And you can add in a code memo so that you can define what the code means and why you created it. Fairly simple. We'll do this live again as well today. The coding system also provides you with the ability to limit the display of codes in the code system to those which you have already used in a document. And so when you highlight this little filter, red filter document icon, instead of showing the entire code system, it'll show the codes that are in that particular document. You can turn that on and off. It can be useful when you're coding your documents to see what you've already coded. Sometimes you are fine and happy with multiple segments of the same code, but in some projects you only want it to appear once. So that's a useful tool there. The other thing, when you're coding your projects, the search tool is also important, because sometimes you'll have a really big coding system and you're trying to find a code that you've created, and you click the search button. I type in the word robbery, and immediately the two instances where that word appears in code names shows up. Okay. And there's icons for case sensitivity and partial word searches as well. So you can, it's pretty powerful. Is it essential? No, it can save you time. And that's probably the most important thing. It can save you time. And finally, in the preferences there, the one thing I'm going to kind of show today is this link here. Click a code to apply the code to a selected segments. So normally we'll drag the code to the segment that we've highlighted, but if we have this turned on, we can just highlight the segment and then just click on the code name and it will automatically code it. The downside with that is you got to be careful that you're not clicking on a lot of things accidentally. So that's just one of the tools there. So I'm going to end this. It's time to go live. So as I said, oops, those are my notes. And you don't need that. So I decided, I spent a lot of time thinking about this webinar, and I was thinking, what are we going to code? And I was trying to think about a new possible project, and sort of related to something I'm doing with one of my colleagues. We're beginning to explore some public health issues. So I was curious, having just watched a recent documentary about the initial responses to the pandemic last year. And I created a project that I'm calling the CDC project. And what I did here, and there's nothing coded in what I did here was begin the process of downloading a variety of documents tied to the last 14 months. No, last year, and from January 2000. And I began with news releases that the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention had posted on their website, and anything that was related to the coronavirus or COVID. And I added in those press releases for 2000. I added in the press releases from 2001. I added in the telephone press briefing transcripts. So they were transcripts. They're not highly formatted at this point, um, of media calls that were done throughout, starting in February and going through the last one actually that they did was in January of this year. I also looked at the process of importing tweets from the account CDC.gov, and I used the Twitter tool, although that's fairly limited because it only gives you the last 7 days. So I had a friend help, and we used an R script, and we downloaded all of the tweets from the CDC since his account allowed us to go back to May, and so we have over 2,000 tweets. So a lot of data, and I was initially interested in this, thinking about it, saying, okay, well, why do we care about this? What do we want to do with this? So I was kind of intrigued by the idea of wanting to know what information was the Center for Disease Control putting out, how is their message changing over time, and were they being co-opted by the administration itself? Okay. And so I created this data set. It's not complete. I'm still adding stuff. I don't know if I'll do anything with it, but I'll do stuff with it with you. And so I also then said, okay, well, what would I code with this? So I began to build a coding system because we needed to have some stuff. Some things like this, recommendations to the public when the CDC was making a specific recommendation. Travel from China, that was very common in January and through March. Whether something was high risk in terms of a recommendation. The word social distancing, shelter in place was really sort of masks. Doesn't even get used until later. Airport screenings, avoiding non-essential travel to China. Again, this was from just the first couple documents, looking at who the audience was. Were they talking about vaccines, testing, schools, travel, for example? I also decided to create a set of codes. Did they consider an activity low risk, medium risk, or high risk? Get a little bit of highlight coding, but mostly as a way for me to explore what the data looked like, and that actually becomes a code. Started to explore the idea of a type of message, and I guess in some ways this is similar to this. So it'll be something where I'll have to think about what the project codes will look like once things are coded. That top one there is just the beginnings of each briefing was a long statement by CDC staff, and then they took questions. And so what I did for a few of the documents was I coded the statement that they made, and I gave that the code statement because then I can use the smart coding tool to look at what they were talking about. So this makes sense, sort of a project. So the question is, so we've got a project, I've got some theory, but I think there's going to be some inductive coding that's going to occur. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some in vivo coding that's going to occur. And the real question is, how do I proceed? So one of the things that we've talked about in our webinars is the fact that when you are beginning a project, and you're exploring your documents, it's sometimes useful, before you have a coding system, it's sometimes useful to use the paraphrase tool to summarize the document, to put the main points of the document into your own words. Now, again, we've talked about this as being useful for both literature reviews, but it's also useful for inductively building a coding system. So I took 2 documents here and did a little bit of paraphrasing, and I did that already for us. So we've got So it's a brief statement. This was on January 17th, 2020. Health screenings from travelers from Wuhan, China for 3 U.S. airports due to the novel coronavirus. Based on current information, risk is viewed as being low to the American public. Additional CD staff deployed to 3 airports. Entry screening doesn't guarantee the virus won't enter the country. And I should have added that too, but Chinese health officials report most patients had been exposed to live animals in a wet market, and the virus has jumped the species barriers to affect humans. No sustained spread of the virus is reported, but indications of person-to-person spread. So I did paraphrasing. If I didn't have a coding system here, I could simply use these and think about how to code stuff. So like this. They're saying risk is to the American public is low. Nevertheless, CDC is taking. So I created a risk category, and I can drag the code from the code system to the highlight and click, and it adds the segment, low risk, and now there's one segment for low risk. I don't have a code for this, so how can I do it? Well, how can I create a new code? I can go here, create new code. I can right-click, create new code. I can also choose code in Vivo, or I could code the last code I used, which is low risk. I'm going to click new code. Helps if I type. I'm not going to worry about the color right now, but I'll put in a color. I should add in a memo to define the code. I can add a comment on this particular segment while I'm adding it. Click OK. Now I have added a new code. You'll notice here I've got a code comment added to it. Now you don't see the code comment here because if you remember, we can see comments or paraphrases. So I'll switch it to comments for the second there, but I'll keep paraphrases on. So I want to add another code. Here's the other thing. When you're coding, actually I can't see the bottom of it. I'm sorry, Alicia. I had moved the chat. The bottom of the chat disappeared. It's a good question. What reason did you want to paraphrase each section? There are a couple reasons why you might want to paraphrase. One, if you're only beginning to get comfortable with your documents, if you will, it's a way of sort of getting to understand them. You can use paraphrasing like this to when you don't have a coding system in place and you're not certain what you're going to code, and you can simply use it to help create a coding system. The categorized paraphrases tool is really useful for that. I only did this for 2 of the sample documents here. I don't always paraphrase. I think if I'm comfortable with what I'm doing, I don't feel like I need to. But it's a choice. Um, so since we do have paraphrasing here for this document, it would actually be useful to show the categorize tool, because there's one advantage to once you've paraphrased. If you add codes from the paraphrases then become comments, which is useful. So since I've paraphrased some stuff here, I can go to paraphrase menu, categorize paraphrases. You know what? Hang on a second. I want to make sure that I've got this document activated, because again, there were two that were paraphrased. Only activated documents. So here's my code system so far. And it shows that I've created the CD staffing deployed. Actively monitoring. Do I have a code for that? I don't think so. So I have to be in this window where it says entry screening. I can right click and create a new code. Click OK. Now you'll notice that this code is applied to this segment here. This is the segment, this is the paraphrase, this is the code. And watch. It shows up here now. And the text of the paraphrase is now converted as a code comment. What's useful about that is if you're going to code things that you have paraphrased, use the categorize tool to do it, because it will convert the paraphrase to a comment so that you have that information. So hopefully that makes sense and you're following along with that. Always feel free to keep asking questions. So let's see here. So I've created several codes. Again, the process is fairly simple here. This is interesting. Is it normal for codes to overlap? Completely normal. You can have lots of codes overlap. So like this active monitoring, I read this paragraph and I might think, but there's more than just monitoring going on. There's a lot of interesting things in here. So like this, that statement by itself strikes me as useful. It's sort of, they're hedging their bets. They're not sure what's going to happen. I can easily code this as something else. No guarantees. I like that idea. No guarantees. I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new code. I'm going to say no guarantees. I'm not going to bother with this for now because I don't want to waste our time. But in general, when I create a new code, I say create a memo and comment what you're doing. If it's important enough to code, it's important enough to, oftentimes to make a note as to why, unless it's so there are instances when that's probably not necessary. But if it's anything substantive, that's useful. So now you'll notice they overlap. The same subcode belong to different superior code levels. Yeah, MAXQDA is pretty. You do have the ability to limit. I'll show you here on preferences. You can say that there can be no duplicate code names on the same level, but you can. So we've got no guarantees. Like so here. I'll show an example. Public interest, new guidelines. I'll just create a code here. Will it let me create public interest again? Yep. Don't do that. So you can have the same name. Can the same subcode belong to different, but if it's going to be used in multiple places, so like an advisory right here, I can have this code, oops. I can have the code advisory here, the code advisory here. Now, they're not the same code. They are treated as completely different codes. And in fact, in the if we were to look at, say, no, that's not going to show it here. The name of the code is going to be type of message advisory. Type of message advisory right there. Recommendations to the public / advisory. So the parent code becomes part of the name of the code. It gets confusing. It's okay that you have similar code names, but just be kind of intentional about it. So let's say you're reading this very simple document here, and let's see, let me think of something useful here. Now this is too long to Mmwr code, because Mmwr codes are limited to the same 63 characters. But this statement right here is something that I might think of as being highly quotable, and I might want to use, or I might want to highlight it. There's a couple of ways I could do that. One way I could do that was I can use my color codes. So I can select highlight color yellow, because that's like the classic color, right? And now this is listed as a yellow code. But I don't really care about the name yellow, so I'm going to go over to the code system. I'm going to right click and I'm going to rename that code to quotables. All right, I activated it too. And now I've got a piece of text that I think is really intriguing that I might want to use later, and it's now showing up in my system as quotables. Now, I do kind of want to point out something here. You'll notice, why did this show up here? When you create new codes, MAXQDA knows kind of where you are highlighted in the coding system. And so it's really important if you don't want a code to end up in some random spot in your system, before you do it, it's useful to kind of select the top level of the code. So I've talked about the ways we create codes, but let's screening at the three U.S. airports. Code that there. I generally wouldn't code these same two things, but for our purposes here, say I want to code that as well. I can simply click this to code that highlighted segment as the last version of it. Now you notice I've got these two identical codes that are in the same spot. Let's watch this. If I select each of these and click it, now what's happened? Now it just becomes one coded segment. So MaxQDA is pretty good at that. Now, but if there was another code in there, that would still remain coded. Hopeful this is helping you. In vivo coding. This language here suggesting this is a novel virus that has jumped the species barrier to infect people. Right click, code in vivo. Notice it's done. Doesn't give me any choices. Doesn't give me anything. But what I have here is a code with that name. So I can look at the properties of that code. You'll also notice that it didn't get the whole thing. It ran out of space because it's limited to 63. Sometimes I think the explanation I've seen about Mmwr coding that was given by my friend and colleague Danielle Jacques was very good in chapter 1 of the book, and she talks about it. Sometimes you don't want to apply your theories of what the respondent is saying. You just want to code things in their own words. And so in Danielle's project, and the best way is to just show this. In Danielle's project, she has a parent code. This is a study of transportation in Dakar. The whole study is in French. And you'll notice she's got, in Senegal, Dakar, Senegal, in vivo codes. And what she's done here is she's captured all of these terms that they had talked about. Il y aura une révolution, c'est sûr. All French, because that's the language the study was done in. And she kept them. Notice there's only one. Interesting, there were two instances of this one. That was surprising. But only one of each of these. But she used these in her later on in her process to kind of reach out and find ways to explore the words, kind of what the people themselves were saying about these three transportation options. So it's kind of an interesting way, and I encourage you to read what she writes about it in chapter 1 of the book. Yes, that's your homework. Notice for quotables, she didn't use the icon, the highlighter pen, because she used those for something else. But she created a code called Great Quotes, and she used the emoticon with a star, and then renamed it, and then just moved that. At which point, so we can do that in our own project. Yes, she kindly let me share her project with you. So this one was called Quotable, right? We'll just delete this for now. So that quoting is gone. I can go to emoticode window. I'll use her star, but I don't have to, because look, I've got all sorts of options here. I'll change the color. Now it's coded as a star, and a red star shows up here. I can just edit. Great quotes or quotables. Now it's a code. I don't have to go back to this if I don't want. Yes, because I had originally, hang on a second. So say I also want to make this quotable, I can just do it here, quotable, or I could go from this, and it's showing the last thing I've used. Richard has pointed out, he says, you have 10 remaining quotables. That's because, yeah, I have a document. The document is the web page of the list of news releases. And I was highlighting the news releases that were about COVID. I was very much struck by the fact that in January and February, when I copied this document in, its formatting got really screwy. There were a lot, January, February, March, April, there was very little for like 3 months. It was weird. But I just highlighted those. Oh, because those were live links. In that instance, I would be best to rename this one. So I've got a lot of documents I need to code with. I do want to point out one thing here. So I did the same with this. I'm not going to go through this process again, but This document was a PDF. This is what they call a morbidity, an MMWR, Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. These are detailed scientific reports that they put out. They're actually pretty useful. Uh, uh, this is a PDF. You'll notice I do have paraphrases. This was actually the initial response from initial public health response and interim clinical guidance in January of that year. It's a PDF. If I want to code it, because it's text, it's text readable. I just have to click into it and drag that, so you'll see the little icon there, and then I would simply add the code that I want. I'll just thought I added one here about wet markets or so now it shows up as being coded here that way. The other thing with the PDF, I can go like this, and I could code the exact same thing or with whatever code I want. But you'll notice here, so go to the retrieve segment here. The first one is the actual text. The second one, it's going to show it as an image. So what I coded was an image. So hopefully that's helpful. Say I'm curious, I want to know in all of these documents, I want to know how many of the documents animal. Run the search. So I run the search here, and you're going to see that it provides me with all these search results. A lot of these are coming from my Twitter data. Yeah, 77 hits and 8 documents and 3 document groups. Be spreading from animal to person, large family of viruses. Coronaviruses is a definition of a coronavirus. Okay. So say I want to code that search. I can use this. Autocode search results with a new code or with an existing code. Now, to do this, I have to be careful. This is a bad example because there's so many of them here. I would not want to code everything with this. So I would probably want to do this. I'd probably want to highlight things and turn them all off with a little dot. But then I could say, then I could hit that again. Now that one, only that one search result has been found. And I could easily, or say there were 2 or 3 that were similar. Let's pretend. Then these 3, I could code with either, I could auto code the search results. If I do that, it's going to ask me which code I've used. And you'll notice it gives me the option to say, do I want to include the search item or a sentence or paragraph? I'm never a fan of coding one word because it doesn't help me a lot. So I would probably do this, the sentence before and 2 sentences after. I can click, I don't want, that one's wrong. So new code. Auto code any animal. So that is not giving me the choice of how much. But let's see what it gives me here. Ah, yes, it does. And then, so it creates the code, and then it gives me this choice. Do I want the sentence or paragraph? Click OK. 2 document segments were selected. Interesting how this one didn't actually have it in there. But notice it created a new code called autocode any animal. And shows me what I've coded and where. This can be really useful as well. Let me give you an example. Actual project, 60 legal opinions, studying the use of narcotics canine sniffs. We've gone through, we've created a full coding system. We've coded all of these concepts. A lexical search in my coding can be useful if it's auto code. It's for whatever documents you choose to autocode in that list that comes up. So I'm going to create a search term false positive. In documents, I can limit it, make it case sensitive, or find whole words. I'll leave it the way it is. Whoa. Now it's providing me with 39 hits and 20 documents. If I want it to be, yeah. So watch. I'm just randomly selecting these. Do the lexical search, false positive, only in activated documents. So now I've got it down to 8 hits in one document. And so 8 times in that document, the word false positive occurs. I could choose to auto code it, or I could simply look to see to make sure that that document, which is right here, DC versus Iowa, right here, false positive has already been coded. So I don't need to. It's actually been coded multiple times. So this oftentimes is useful, or say you've coded 20 documents when all of a sudden you add a new code to the system that you think is really important. And you're like, oh, dang it, now I got to go back and I got to recode all of these. You don't have to. I mean, you don't reread all of these. What you can do is look to do a word search to see if you can find other documents that you've already coded. So, for example, let's pretend with this system that we've coded these are the ones we've coded so far. Then what we're going to simply do is do the lexical search on the terms that we know we used in creating the new code to look at those old documents to see if they're still there. I want to show you one other tool. funny. I thought we weren't going to even have 45 minutes worth of stuff. I was wrong. I've got this area here of telephone press briefings. Guess my wife is going to the grocery store. Piece of information which will be shared with the world. Yep. You can add a video, you can highlight the section, and you can code it. I'll show you that in 1 second. But so these telephone briefings, if you remember here, I talked about a CDC statement to start briefings, where I basically coded the first part of each of their audio conferences. Um, uh, that's perfect in many ways for using what we call the smart coding tool. I understand, Alicia. I just, it's crazy. When I was looking at all of the resources that MAXQDA provides, coding is the heart of all of this. And to this point, we actually haven't had webinars on it. We'll probably reoffer this. Smart, and I'll continue to revise it. So the smart coding tool is interesting. So right now it's not showing anything, but let's go to CDC statement to start tell. You know what? I don't want to use this one. I want to use a much neater one for you. It's the plain old work-life balance. So I've got, this is the life satisfaction sample project. There are a series of interview questions in this project. And the way that works, and so we'll look at here, we'll quit that briefly. You'll see here, so these are brief interviews. So here's the first one: typical workday, flexible hours, free time, self-care. They're questions. Go to the next person: typical workday. So this first question here is coded as a typical workday. And so I don't know if she's here today, but I'm working with someone on a project where we've got interviews, and each interview question gets coded for the question name. Okay. So for example, this question name: describe your typical workday. And because every document has typical workday, see, typical workday, that's a code which is really just an interview question code. I didn't have enough time. I was going to try to create my own dummy version of this. But what's neat about that is the smart coding tool. Say this is your interview question code. Here are all of the respondents to your interviews and their answers to the question, what does your typical workday look like? And so you read it, and you can simply, it's just like the categorized paraphrase. I'm just going to make this up. flexible hours. Now it's showing flexible hours. It's also showing there's a paraphrase segment for this. I can right click, create and assign a new code. I can add in a comment for this segment. And what's true for me. So now I can also code this same segment with, now the way this works, it was really important here. And I did this on purpose, sort of, not really. You can't drag from here to here. You have to drag from the big window to the small, because if I switched unpredictable hours, it's going to show me the segments that are coded that way. So typical workday is a code, but it's really also a question. So think about it. You do an interview, you've got 10 questions. Before you code anything else, code each question. You can include the question in the code itself if you want, but just code each question for each of the participants. And then you can simply see them all at once. So instead of with an interview, what's useful about that is, so with interviews, you're looking at all of the responses to one question instead of, it's really easy. Hang on a second. Instead of looking at a full interview at once. Now, you might consider that a negative, because by only seeing what was coded with that question, you might miss out on something. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't look at the full document, but I think for a first read through of an interview, this is a useful tool, a very useful tool. So again, I want to add this to free time and self-care. I'm just making it up. All I do is I can just sort of drag it to there. It adds it. Anywhere, it adds it. If I don't think this code belongs, just make it go away. Paraphrase segments is only telling me that there's a paraphrase segment for that segment as well. How can you get back to the source text from here? Watch. Click on Riley, position 3, and look where I am. Riley, position 3. Click on Kazumi. Now I'm in Kazumi. This is true throughout most of MAXQDA. Anytime you're in a tool where you're dealing with a segment, it will pretty much automatically shift the document to it. There was a question about video. Notice everything's blocked out because I'm in the smart coding tool. Got to hit quit. Find Scalia. Oh, come on. Load this. Okay. So here's a multimedia browser.
Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge.
I can take a segment, highlight a segment of a video or audio clip. I can click right click it, code with new code with police officer. That was the last code that I used. I could also, so I can code with police officer. So now police officer, the little emoticon thing shows up. I can also do this. So that segment gets there. So you can add a video as a document. You can code right on it while you're watching it. You can also create memos while you're watching it and write about it. That's the other thing. I said I was going to talk about this. Can I go back to our original project? I've pointed out the point about memos, about code comments. Code comments are important because when I am ultimately, let's see, retrieving this segment, you will automatically have the note that you put there with it. Now, maybe you'll just say, look again at this, or interesting, or this seems contradictory. Comments are useful. When I'm coding documents, though, not only, I've already listed that this was like highly quotable, right? I thought this was interesting. You know, I might select this information and I might say, you know what, this is really intriguing, and create a memo here as well. And this is where it's sort of like in its, I'd make this up and I'd write this better. Writing a memo. I don't generally write one-word memos, but I think memos are useful where you're trying to capture items. And if I'm interested in, if this study is interested in changing the way messaging changes, I would think this would be a really important piece of information. You know, granted, this is literally the first post news release that they put out on this at all, at least in the year 2000. I should check to see if there was one in December of 2019. I don't think there was. And writing is important because, you know, think of MAXQDA as a complete toolkit. You have the ability here to do everything. So the memo is searchable. The memo is not limited to 255 characters. The memo can be used in the manager. You can have your free memos. This is what I was planning on talking about today. I never finished that free memo. I can do a lexical search of the memos and it'll find it. I can't search for comments. I use them both. If it's something brief and it's tied specifically to a segment, then I use a comment. I might still use a comment for the segment, for the coded segment, but I might also write a memo if it's something more important. Trying to think what I didn't cover. There is a whole series, and I really don't think it's useful for us right now at an hour and 20 minutes in, but I was able to do the 7-day Twitter search. I was hopeful once I got a academic researcher account from Twitter that I would be able to go beyond 7 days, but alas, I can't. Not in MAXQDA. Um, uh, the tweets, Danielle runs a webinar on this fairly regularly, and I would encourage you to watch that. But it's basically a specialized table document, and you can highlight, you can take advantage of auto-coding tweets with hashtags and authors, analyzing tweets, and so on. Focus groups also have a variety, and they demand their own webinar by themselves. I took a tried to, that didn't even work. It only created one. Oh no, yeah. I took a one of the telebriefings to see if I could turn it into a focus group. Um, um, eh. And it's because I'm looking at the codes instead of the document. Which one did I turn it into? So in a focus group, each speaker is a code as well, and it gets a special type of code here for the speaker name. So Dr. Miss Messonnier, she's with the CDC, and so her statement, this would be what she had said. That was the statement, actually. That would require a lot more time to kind of go into than we have here. This doesn't cover everything with coding, obviously, and you're right. I think we could spend a long time on it if we wanted to. But it's at the heart of what we do. So you want to get comfortable with it. Couple things. You're coding a project. You do something. You're not happy with what you did. Just add that. You can just Control Z or Command Z, undo with what you just did. Second hint, feel free on a regular basis. Every time you start it, every time you do a new batch of work, use the Save Project As. Open the project, click Save Project As, give it version 2, version 3, or by date, or some other thing. Click Save, and then open the saved copy. Why would you do that? Well, you're protecting yourself. And then, by the way, archive all of them. MaxQDA will yell at you for saving stuff sometimes in a shared folder system like Dropbox. It's true it can cause lots of problems if you have multiple users using the same file at the same time. It can create conflicted versions. But if it's just your Dropbox and it's just you, storing it in Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever, or iCloud is perfectly safe. It just is protecting you. Save your data. You never have to save files because everything you do gets automatically saved and written to the MaxQDA project database file in real time. That's what a save is. But saving your project as is very useful. I'm going to say farewell. Next week, we will take coded data and we will walk through the process of coding.